Do you aspire to one day write a best-selling novel? Well, one of the ways you can shorten your path to achieving that goal is by studying the works of the greats. So in this video, we're going to take a deep dive look at one of the most successful books of all time, Harry Potter. And we're going to do a deep dive analysis on some of the things that made the book so successful. What's up, guys? Dave Jacobson here, best-selling author and book publisher. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on why Harry Potter was so incredibly successful. So without further ado, I'm going to shrink my melon-sized head here, and we're going to dive right into the video and the analysis. I'm going to start by giving you some high-level tips for how you can write a best-selling novel using the context of Harry Potter. Then I'm going to do a deep dive analysis, as you can see here, on the text itself. And we're going to take a look at some things that made this book so unbelievably successful. So first, how to write a best-selling novel. And we're going to, again, focus on Harry Potter as our example. But sort of tip number one for you in this regard is to start with a concept that has broad appeal. And what do I mean by that exactly? Well, let's take a look at Harry Potter. So Harry Potter is a middle grade fantasy book about wizards, right? So the genre of the book is middle grade fantasy. And we know that, there's a lot of middle grade readers, and we know that a ton of people love fantasy. So immediately, the genre that was selected for this book has broad appeal. Why is that important? Well, think about like if I write a book about, for example, the antennae of bees. Well, there's not a lot of people who really care that much about the antennae of bees, so it's going to be very hard for me to sell a lot of books on that particular topic, right? And in that very niche space. So basically, from a marketing business perspective, you have to start with a product. Your book is going to be a product that has a total available market size that is big, right? The bigger your total available market size, that is the number of people who potentially might purchase your book, the higher chance you have of selling a lot of your product. So start with a genre that has broad appeal, and then drill down into a niche, a concept within that genre that also has broad appeal. Taking Harry Potter as an example, wizards and magic, that has broad appeal. There's been tons of successful books involving wizards and magic, including, for example, Lord of the Rings and other, some of the most successful books of all time also use that concept. So J.K. Rowling didn't invent that niche concept. She took it and made it her own, and she ran with it. So tip number one, start with a concept that has broad appeal. The second tip is write a story with a strong, unique hook. So Harry Potter, for example, uses the core idea of a hidden magical world existing alongside the mundane Muggle world. This is obviously a very strong hook, and it makes it something that's intriguing, right? Right from the get-go. You want to know, how is this world hidden within the world we already know about, right? So it's intriguing, but it's also distinguishable from other stories, right? So that is kind of the uniqueness aspect to it. So write a story with a strong, unique hook, as Harry Potter did. Now, step number three, or tip number three, is focus on a concept that is easy to pitch and communicate. Easy to pitch and communicate both to agents, if you're trying to take the traditional publishing path, as well as readers. So how does Harry Potter do that? Well, Harry Potter focuses on the concept of a boy wizard attending a school for wizards, right? That's a very straightforward, easy to explain concept. And people can gravitate toward it if they're interested in that kind of thing. So that's just, it's just a great example of how you can take a concept that is very easy to pitch and communicate and be extremely successful with that concept. And then the final tip is flawless technical execution. execution. And that is going to segue nicely into the next part of the video, where we're going to do a deep dive analysis of some of at least the first few paragraphs of the text. And we're going to look at how J.K. Rowling not only started with a broad appeal concept, wrote a story with a strong, unique hook, focused on a concept that was easy to communicate, but also had flawless execution from a technical perspective. So let's now dive into that particular portion of this video. So as you can see here, I found online the chapter 1 of Harry Potter, the first book in the series. I was kind of surprised that you could actually just download this online, but apparently you can, and there's other chapters you can download as well for the purposes of study and research. So let's talk about what made this work so extraordinary and so extraordinarily successful from a technical perspective. We already talked about high level, some of the things that she did, but now let's drill in deeper and take a look at the text itself. So the first chapter of the book is called The Boy Who Lived. Before I dive into an analysis of that chapter title, I just want to start by saying your titles are very important. And I actually did a video on this very topic. If I can find it, I'll put a link in the description. But basically, the way I look at it is, if you want to sell a lot of books, you kind of have to reverse engineer the book purchasing process and put yourself in the seat or mind of a potential reader and what they think about when they choose books that they may or may not purchase, right? So the first thing you do if you're a prospective reader of a book is you look at the title, right? If you go into a bookstore or if you go to Amazon.com to purchase a book, the first thing you see is a title. And so that's the first make or break opportunity as an author to draw a reader in, right? So if your title is unique, if it's original, if it's interesting, if it's humorous, if it's clever, if there's something about the title that draws you in, and if it, again, appeals to a broad audience and has that unique, strong hook associated with it, then there's a greater likelihood that the reader is going to move forward in the next step in the process of purchasing your book. Well, what's the second thing someone might do before they purchase a book and to decide whether or not they're going to purchase it? Well, they're going to look at the book blurb, right? So you need a strong concept, as we talked about, a strong, unique hook, which should be communicated clearly in your summary of your book or your book blurb, right? So once you have those two things in place, a reader's next going to, if they like the title and if they're engaged by the book blurb and the concept and the idea of the hook that's contained therein, they might open up the book. Or on Amazon, they might click on that feature that allows them to preview the first few pages. And they're going to read the first sentence and or paragraph. And so the first sentence, paragraph, the first couple of paragraphs are absolutely critical to the success of your book. And that obviously did not escape the attentions of successful authors like J.K. Rowling. And so we're going to look now at how the first page or so of her book was very captivating and what it does to draw in readers. And this is going to get us into the technical analysis. So The Boy Who Lived. First of all, that's an outstanding title for the first chapter of a book. Why is it outstanding? Well, it does a number of things very concisely. First of all, if you think about it, there's nothing interesting about a boy who lived, right? Most boys live. And so the very title itself forces you to engage a little bit and think deeply about what the title is even talking about. So there's kind of a mystery in the title, right? There's a question that's planted in our mind. Well, what's so interesting about that? Why is it interesting that the boy who lived? And if you think about it for a while, if you kind of do engage in it, you might come to the conclusion that, well, maybe there's a unique reason why this particular boy shouldn't have lived. And boy, that's pretty interesting. Why is it the case that this boy shouldn't have lived, but then overcame the odds and actually did live in the end, right? So there's a lot packed into it. And it also introduces the protagonist of the story in the very first two words. So the focus of the chapter title draws us into the story that the author wants to tell. So there's a lot going on there in that chapter title. And as you can see, there's a lot to unpack when you actually analyze it. And it's short, it's concise, and it draws you in. So now getting into the first sentence of the first chapter. I'm just going to read it and we're going to talk about it. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. So if you've read Harry Potter, you're very familiar with this line. And the reason it is so successful, I think, as I'm going to show you now and talk about now, is it does so much in so little space. First of all, it introduces two of the main characters, right? The very first two words are Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. So we have a brief introduction of two characters that will be ultimately very important to the story. Not only does it introduce some of the characters, but it also introduces the setting, right? So immediately after that, it says, of number 4 Privet Drive. So nothing fancy going on here. It's just a simple introduction, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive. But then some of the magic starts taking place in the rest of the sentence. We're proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Okay, so now we're getting character development. We're getting characterization, right? We're starting to learn a lot about these characters in a very short period of time. Very concisely, right? So we know that they're proud that they're perfectly normal, but not only are they proud that they're normal, they're proud to say that they're perfectly normal, right? So now we know that they like to talk about themselves. They like to, they boast, they're boastful. But they also, that implies that they care a lot about what other people think about them. Right? So we're learning a lot about them in in one sentence. And then now let me say, if that had been the end of the sentence, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. That would have been an okay first sentence, but it wouldn't have been the best first sentence, right? It probably wouldn't have drawn you in that much. But this last sort of snippet here that's attached to the end of the sentence, thank you very much, that takes the sentence from ordinary and makes it extraordinary. How does it do that? Well, first of all, there's no quotes here, so we don't have, the author's not telling us explicitly that this is actually what Mr. and Mrs. Dursley said or say, but it's certainly implied, right? So we get right away, we get a sense for not only the characterization in their characters and what they're proud of and what's important to them, which will become important later on as character motivation, but we also get a sense for their personality, right? And not only do we get a sense for their personality, that they're the type of people that would say, oh, we're perfectly normal, thank you very much, right? But we also get entertainment value. Okay, so this is another tip that wasn't in the high-level strategy that I provided earlier, but this is maybe bullet point number 5. You need to entertain people. If you're writing commercial fiction or commercial fantasy, you got to ask yourself, why do people pick up books, right? Why do they purchase books? Well, they want to be entertained. They want to feel something. They want to laugh. They want to cry. They want to have some emotional experience, or they want to just be entertained. They want to pass the time. They want to escape from reality for a while, right? So she's doing that right in the first sentence I'm entertained. How am I entertained? Well, it's humorous, right? These two people are obviously humorous characters, and she's giving us permission not only to laugh, but to laugh at these characters, right? Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. So we have permission to laugh, and we can laugh, and we do laugh because it's funny. And that draws us into the next sentence. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Well, that last part of the sentence, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense, is doing a lot. It's, again, going back to characterization, it's providing for us clear motivation of these characters, right? They want to avoid anything strange or unusual and being associated with anything strange or mysterious because they don't hold with such nonsense, right? And if you put all of this together, you can even infer why they don't hold with such nonsense. Well, we found out earlier that they're proud to say that they're perfectly normal, right? So we know that they care about what other people think about them. And so then we can infer that maybe perhaps the reason they don't hold with such nonsense is because they care so much about what people think about them that they don't want to be associated with anything strange or mysterious, right? They're not going to put up with that. So we've got deep character insight in this first paragraph, a lot of characterization going on. We have character motivation, which is not just random motivation that, she's telling us some of their motivations and some of their personality traits, but motivation that's going to play an important role in the development of the story, right? If you know the Harry Potter story, you know that this desire for the Dursleys to be well-liked and to be perfectly normal is really what develops the conflict of the story between the Dursleys and Harry, right? And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But that is kind of the last piece I really want to touch on here. Another reason this first paragraph is not only ordinary, but extraordinary and very powerful is that it sets up the conflict very concisely, right? So everything that she's doing here has a purpose, notice. She's just not telling us, she's not just telling us random facts about the Dursleys. She's setting up the story by developing the conflict. Now, why is conflict so important in a story? Because conflict is what drives decision-making, right? So if you just have two characters sitting on the couch watching TV, there's no conflict in their life, they're not going to be motivated to do anything that is entertaining or interesting. There's no high stakes involved, right? But if all of a sudden there's a giant snake that climbs up from the back of the couch and they don't want to be eaten by the giant snake, now we have tension, we have dramatic tension, we have conflict, and we can see some entertaining, interesting responses to this unique conflict. Right? So it's conflict that drives action, and it's action that drives storytelling. And she's setting up that conflict right here out of the gate. So that is why this paragraph is so powerful. It does a lot at once. It tells us who's involved, right? Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. It tells you where this is going to take place, the setting, number 4 Privet Drive. And it sets up the what is what we might expect to happen, namely some conflict arising from their personality traits, which are humorous, and from this little tidbit right here. So these two words, strange or mysterious, are actually the hook of the paragraph. J.K. Rowling doesn't come out and say something strange or mysterious was about to happen to them. She implies it, right? She allows the reader's imagination to infer what's happening, which engages and activates the imagination, but she implies and suggests that there's going to be something strange or mysterious. Well, how does she imply or suggest that? She says they were the last people you expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, right? Well, why would she say that if there wasn't going to be something strange or mysterious happening? So that is how it's implied. If you're an intelligent enough reader, you realize the subtext here is get ready because there's going to be something strange or mysterious that takes place, which the Dursleys do not approve of. And that's going to create conflict and tension that's going to drive a very interesting story. So that's the first paragraph, and I just provided sort of some insights into what makes it so technically significant and amazing as a first paragraph, and what draws you into it. The last piece I want to mention is that there are questions in this paragraph. There are things that we don't yet know, and that's important because that's what drives us to want to learn more, right? So again, she hinted at the idea that there's something strange or mysterious that's about to happen. And the word mysterious itself is full of mystery, right? So it draws us to into the story because it makes us want to answer the question, what strange or mysterious thing is about to happen, right? So again, a hook needs to draw you in. It ideally makes you ask questions and want to learn more. So, reading on. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Okay, so now she's going into more characterization, but she's giving a physical description of the characters, which is also very important, right? This is work that needs to be done because a lot of people, when they read books, they want to be able to visually picture what's happening. And you can't visually picture what's happening if you can't visually picture the characters. So she's giving us a visual representation. And it's sort of an exaggerated, almost Roald Dahl kind of larger-than-life visual representation of the character. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. But so far, the start of this paragraph is, it's good. It's doing some of the legwork, but it's not really, it doesn't zing yet, right? It doesn't have that magic to it. But the next sentence cures that. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, right? So that's hilarious. That's funny because she's contrasting Mrs. Dursley to Mr. Dursley, who had no neck, and saying it in a very funny, playful way. Well, she had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, right? That's just a funny, playful way of saying it, which again goes back to entertainment value. You'll notice if you read the whole first chapter, first of all, there's no sentence that doesn't accomplish something toward the overall storytelling, whether it's characterization, setting up conflict, building tension and stakes, or entertaining us and making us laugh and feel something, right? So every sentence in the entire first chapter is accomplishing something. And here she's giving us a little levity. She's giving us that humor value, right? And it continues in the next part of the sentence, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. So again, she's doing characterization, but at the same time, she's providing levity and she's making us entertained because we're laughing at this. Just that visual image of this woman who cares so much about what the neighbors think that she's actually peeking over, the fence of the neighbors is very funny, right? The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. So this again is just setting up conflict, right? They think so highly of Dudley that when Harry comes into the picture, it's going to help create that sort of tension between the family. Other than that, there's not much really being accomplished in this sentence. But, she's sort of providing the full context. Now we know about all of the Dursleys, which is important. Now, the last paragraph I'm going to kind of do an analysis on is the third paragraph here, and then we'll conclude and wrap up. But the Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, right? So if the sentence ended at the Dursleys had everything they wanted, there's no story in that, right? They've already attained the goal. There's no conflict. There's no drive toward something more. But, so therefore the word but was inevitable here. But they also had a secret, right? And this secret, again, is developing the conflict that is about to happen. The tension that's going to drive the story forward. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. Okay, so that is one of the most important sentences here, or parts of this entire first few paragraphs, because again, it's going to set up the conflict, right? Well, if their greatest fear is that somebody would discover their secret, well, now that she's told us that, all that J.K. Rowling has to do to create conflict that's going to drive the story forward and make the characters take action is to provide a threat of their secret becoming revealed, which she will do soon, right? We can expect that reading the subtext here. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Okay, well now we've got some new characters introduced, the Potters, whoever they are. Again, she finishes the sentence on Potters because that leaves us with a question in our mind. Who are these Potters? We need to find out about them. Who are these people that would get in the way of what the Dursleys want so much in life, right? And how are they going to get in the way of it? What is it about the Potters that makes it unbearable for the Dursleys to think about anyone finding out about them? Well, we have to read on to find out. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister. That's pretty funny, right? Because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. So, good-for-nothing husband, right? She's giving us more characterization. She doesn't come out and say that Mrs. Dursley called the husband good for nothing, but we can infer it. And then we know that that's the kind of thing that she gossips about, right? We're as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. So that word un-Dursleyish is brilliant, okay? Because it's so loaded. First of all, it's not a word that exists in the English language, but we immediately know what it means, right? We know that, and what it implies. It implies that the Dursleys think of themselves as the example of what should be, right? And anyone who doesn't fit into the mold of being Dursley-like, anyone who's un-Dursley-ish, is good for nothing and is not really someone you want to associate with. So, very loaded word there, and brilliant because it also just the fact that she's got the confidence to create a word that no one's ever heard of before, and know that we're gonna instantly know what it means. It demonstrates to us and gives confidence in our knowing that this is a good storyteller and this is a good writer, and it encourages us to read on. So let's do it. Let's read on. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. Right? Again, we're building that tension. We're building that possibility for conflict. Once the Potters do arrive in the street, we know that the Dursleys are going to shudder, and there's going to be a threat to their status quo, and we're going to have reason for them to take action, right? Which drives storytelling. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son, too, but they had never seen him. So this is the first time we hear about Harry Potter in the entire book. This is the introduction in our imagination of Harry Potter. And the first word used to describe him is small. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too. Well, why do they say small? Why does she say small here? Well, for one, it's just purely descriptive. We know that it's a young boy, right? But she doesn't say young. She says small. So small is a much broader concept than young, and it can mean so many things. So one of the things that J.K. Rowling's doing here, either wittingly or unwittingly, is she's immediately setting up this image in our mind of Harry Potter as this small person, right? He is meek. He is, he's not larger than life. And so that's going to contrast with his destiny and his purpose and his fate, right? Eventually, he's going to be the most powerful, important wizard of all time, right? So to start out as small, she's adding this theme of humility, and she's simultaneously creating that ironic contrast that will play out later in the book. And she's planting the seed in her mind that this boy is going to start out small, though he's going to go on to do great things, right? And then the final sentence of this paragraph, this boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. So this last sentence solidifies and reinforces what has been planted and hinted at all along, namely that there's going to be dramatic tension, conflict as a result of the interplay between the Potters, and namely the small son, being un-Dursley-ish, and the fact that the Dursleys care so much about what everyone thinks and the neighbors think, and all they care about is protecting their reputation, right? So that is going to be the conflict that drives not only this chapter, but the action in the next 4 or 5 chapters, right? So she's taken 3 paragraphs to do it, but she's set up all the conflict for the next 4 chapters. She's done a lot of characterization. She's given us the who, where, and what of the story. And she's done it all while entertaining us and providing us with reason to believe that she's a good writer, that she has command of the craft, of the technical piece, and also that she has the ability to entertain us with her wit, which she will obviously do for the rest of the book. And that's all for now, guys. If you got value out of this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.